off to a good start. Welcome, everyone. The mayor is away in Grenada on vacation, so as acting mayor, I have the pleasure of chairing this evening's meeting. So welcome to the regular meeting of council. Start with my Lekwungen practice. Oseam Chelacha. That's the welcome my honorable friends in Lekwungen that I've learned from Councillor Gary Sam and Chief Ron Sam. So just please note that there is the meeting this evening is being video recorded and streamed live and archived on the municipal website, so the backs of your heads are visible on the screen. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territories of the Coast and Strait Salish people. Specifically, we recognize the Lekwungen-speaking people known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and that their historic connections to these lands continue to this day. I'll also note that Councillor Braithwaite is away. She was off to the Junos and is making her way back from Vancouver, recognizing her nephew who was nominated for a Juno for his drumming in a technical metal band, commonly known as death metal. So I guess we'll begin with the minutes and report. Oh, sorry, and I have two other announcements I'm just going to quickly make before we get into anything. We have a new staff member, key staff member. I'd like to introduce our new Deputy Director of Corporate Services, Deb Hopkins. Deb comes to us from Saanich with long history there of 18 years and lots of experience. And so I'm really excited and pleased that we have somebody with so much experience and local knowledge. And you can, of course, bring us some best practices from our neighboring community, I'm sure. And so a warm welcome to you, Deb. Thank you for coming, but I please forgive us if we mess up on that Deborah, Debbie. But we're doing our best already, and in the meetings I will stick to your last name, so that'll be easier. Thank you. All right, so let's move along. I'm gonna I'll save my remarks for the mayor's remarks. So we'll begin with minutes and reports.
Move receipt of the public hearing of March 12th.
Second.
Can we do all of these at once, Mr. Jones?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Move receipt of items 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Call the question. Opposed? Or, sorry, all in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Carries. Okay, now I'll move on to my mayor's remarks. Acting mayor's remarks. I'm just going to let everyone know that we received an email from our former long-serving Chief Administrative Officer, Bill Cochran, recently. And so those of you who've been coming to meetings for a long time will remember Mr. Cochran, who wanted to let us know that Ian Forster, who was the treasurer for Oak Bay, who started as a junior clerk in 1948 and was our treasurer after 39 years of service, ended up being the treasurer when he left, but served as a treasurer for a very long time, passed away. He passed away on March 19th at the Jubilee Hospital and was predeceased by his wife of 65 years, Joyce, in 2017, and is survived by his 3 sons. He was a hardworking and supportive man who served the municipality, as I said, for 39 years. He always maintained his sense of humor and optimism. And a funny little piece of information was that he played a big role in helping to create this new coat of arms to replace the original, which was a creation of Rattenbury that was a sailboat in the bay with Mount Baker in the background and 3 little birds in the air, and which Mr. Burton like to describe as the treasurer for Oak Bay as cheap, cheap, cheap. So I thoroughly enjoyed Mr. Cochran's email, which also had many other interesting tidbits, and I've asked him to continue writing those emails so that we can have more information supplied to the archives, as that's where he did actually initially send the email, was to Caroline Duncan, our archivist. But he had some more great stories about how the chains of office came to be and other things, but I won't go on and on. And as we have a fairly short agenda, I'm sure everybody's hoping to get out of here a little bit earlier than we usually do. One other thing I'm going to mention is that I had the honor this morning of participating in a meeting with the Headway group, which is the Epilepsy and Parkinson's advocacy group. And they have offices on Oak Bay Avenue, but on the Victoria side. We met this morning, and today is the awareness day for epilepsy. So you're supposed to wear purple for epilepsy, so hence my earrings today. Good job, Councillor Croft. And Councillor Zelka, actually, you're both also wearing purple. So, but today was a very emotional meeting where the mayors of the region were informed by those that have the condition, and from a range of ages, from I think about a 9-year-old girl to some seniors that have had epilepsy their entire lives, the challenges they face in an urban environment, most to do with transportation. And so it was a very informative session, and I learned a lot. And I know that there's a lot we can do as a community to be informed and just to be aware when somebody has a seizure that they may appear as if they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And so showing compassion and kindness and questioning before we make assumptions about people's behavior when they fall down. It may not be because they're under the influence. It may be because they're suffering from a seizure. So try to reserve judgment is what I learned, and not to make an assumption about somebody's condition, and to offer assistance no matter what, and not always to call an ambulance, because an ambulance costs the person in BC $90. So that can cause them further stress, which doesn't help them recover from the episode. So I learned a lot this morning, and I appreciated the invitation. And lastly, I would also mention that I participated at the opening ceremonies of the Moving Trans History Forward conference at Uvic this weekend. It was initially started by the chair in gender studies, at Uvic, and 3 years ago there were 50 participants. Last year there were 150 participants, and this year there were close to 300 from around the world. And so it was really a wonderful opening keynote done by, the whole ceremony was lovely, but the keynote address was by a mom from the United States, Isabel Rose, whose 9-year-old daughter is transgender, and she brought to light all the challenges she's faced as being a parent of a child that's transgender, and also coming to terms with that, as well as facing societal challenges and institutional challenges within the school systems and elsewhere that her daughter faces. And so she's become an advocate. She lives in New York City, and she traveled all the way to the keynote address at the conference and was very well received. And if you want to hear more about it, you can talk to me later or check out my Facebook page, because I wrote a brief about it on my Facebook, and or obviously visit the website, because they had sessions all weekend and lots of conversation, which was really very, very cool. So that is my remarks. Let's move along to the public participation period. This is an opportunity for members of the public in attendance at that meeting to address council, regarding topics that directly impact the District of Oak Bay. Welcome. I will get my timer ready. So we have 3 minutes, as you're well aware, Ms. Cumming. And you're going to put down your name and the municipality of residence. For those that are, if there's anyone new to this, that we all have we have a 3-minute process. Thank you. And I'll say welcome.
Thank you. I'm Marion Cumming from 151 Sunny Lane here in Oak Bay. And like you, I'm just so grateful to live here on this beautiful Lekwungen land. And I found out belatedly that this evening there will be a discussion of proposed regulations relating to steep slopes. And the regret that I don't have an entire neighborhood with me right now. But I think there are some ongoing concerns. And I'm so grateful to Councillors Zelka and Murdoch and others, and to staff who've been working on these regulations as our thought deepens. And I noticed in some of the initial thinking that there was a proposal that we adapt some of Saanich's the regulations. And there's one in particular that I'd like to caution against. It calls for allowing landowners to take down 1 or 2 trees every year. And that's fine in a rural community like Saanich. But I would think in the context of steep slopes in Oak Bay, it could result in gradually denuding the land. And I would hope that we would follow the directives that are implemented in North Vancouver. And there are 2 quotes in particular that I think would be quite applicable. One is that state and articulated buildings that integrate and reflect the natural site contours and slope conditions should be used. And another, that there should be a minimum 10-meter buffer area from the top or base of any steep slope. And one would hope also that this trend towards lot line to lot line site clearance can be avoided, one would say even beyond steep slopes. We've often encountered this current allowable setback, leaving too little space for nature. And I would hope that variances would be required if a steep slope landowner is intent on altering the topography of the steep slope and removing existing vegetation and trees, as we found at 207 Sunny Lane. And that would also alleviate conditions of drainage being faulty to the point where neighbors, in that case, have been flooded. And I'd like to express appreciation for all the work that staff and others have done to mitigate that flooding and install new drainage and curbing and paving, so that it has created quite an improvement in the situation.
Thank you, Ms.
And
Cumming.
the neighbors who aren't here tonight were asking for neighborhood consultation, that where 2 neighbors in particular, actually 3, have been undergoing interior renovations and keeping to the footprints of their existing homes, and went through rigorous requirements that they meet very high standards where right across the street that they were required, well, right across the street, the developer was allowed very free rein in developing his project.
Thank you, Ms. Cumming.
Thank you.
Are there any other further speakers? Welcome.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Kirby. My name is Esther Patterson. I'm from Woodlawn Crescent. I just wanted to say a few words also about these steep slopes. I'm certainly not a geotechnical or engineering type person, but I did have experience on the Sunshine Coast with some of the regulations that they have. So I got them out, and they had 2 DPAs, one for steep slopes and one for rocky beachfront, escarpment, rockfall, and upland slope hazards. So their detailing for the DPAs was quite intensive, and it's unfortunate that in BC there isn't a little more uniformity to guide municipalities. But I note that in the lengthy details they have for compliance, one of the measures for steep slopes is detailed measures to safeguard neighboring properties and structures arising from proposed construction or site preparation, including blasting. And they go on to require a geotechnical report that has to be filed when you put in your application, and it must meet the report guidelines for legislated landslide assessments for proposed residential development in British Columbia, published by the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of British Columbia, including submission of Schedule D landslide assessment assurance statement to specify that the land may be safely used for use intended. So there are some good guidelines available, and those may be things that we would like to consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson. Are there any other speakers? Great.
Acting Mayor, members of council, my name is Brian Rendell,
Welcome.
and I live at 362 Sunset Avenue. I have previously addressed this council concerning the development on 207 Sunny Lane. I was one of the neighbors that Marion Cummings just mentioned had been involved in a ongoing, and we're now finished, renovation. We were subject to a lot of reasonable bylaws and requirements. The concern that I expressed when I was here 2 meetings ago is there is apparently, I would now say obviously, a double standard between residents who renovate their houses and developers who come in and destroy them, and thank you, and developers who come in and destroy the existing houses and then apparently have freedom to go lot line to lot line and to remove every living thing on their property. So there certainly appears to be a double standard. Now, given a little further thought, I wonder, Oak Bay takes a lot of pride in its character. And it doesn't take much imagination. You can drive around Oak Bay once right now to see a lot of character houses disappearing, being replaced by boxes from lot line to lot line. Now, some people like boxes, that's great, but not from lot line to lot line. I would suggest that some work, and I haven't heard anything concerning my previous submission, and I did file my submissions with council as well. Finally, I just ask a question about bylaws. I'm continually told that 207 complies with the bylaws. I have no doubt about that. That's the issue. There's obviously a double standard in the bylaws. But I wonder if there's any bylaw concerning controlling detritus and refuse from an ongoing renovation, not a renovation, ongoing development. Because I know at least one councillor here drove by 207 today, I assume on his way here, and had to pass by a large pile of junk, and there doesn't appear to be any control at all or interest in the interests of the other neighbors. Those are my submissions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other further speakers? Okay, seeing none, we'll move along to the next item, which is communications. So the first item is number 8, request for financial assistance. And we have a note from the Director of Corporate Services. Did you want to introduce that item? Or should we just move straight to council?
Madam Chair, happy to respond to any questions. This just wasn't on the last agenda as many other items were referred to estimates.
Okay. This is that's the next item then. So your note is the heads up that why the Community Association of Oak Bay was not on the previous agenda. And so should we wish to move that to estimates, then I would need a motion to do so. Okay, thank you, Mr. Jones.
I'll move to refer this to estimates.
Seconded.
Is there any comments or questions for staff? No? Call a question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. That's carried. All right, so that would be as number 9 as well, because that encompasses the report from the Community Association. I see there are representatives from the Community Association here. Should there have been any questions for them? But I think we've addressed both in one go. So thanks for attending this evening, and we will deal with the application or the grant application at the estimates process in 2 weeks' time. April 5th and 12th are the budget estimates meetings. So quickly moving along to item number 10, which is Oak Bay Heritage Commission minutes.
Move receipt.
Seconded.
Are there any questions or comments from council? Call a question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. So item number 11, moving along to an issue that was just raised by a couple of members of the public, or all 3 members of the public, sorry, which is the measures to mitigate impacts on steep slopes. We have a report from the Acting Director of Building and Planning, Ms. Deborah Jensen. Ms. Jensen, did you want to give us an introduction, or should we just go straight to council for questions? Mr. Jones?
Sorry, Madam Chair, just for the benefit of the audience. So there's a couple items on the agenda now that arise as of a result of notices of motion that were from previous council meetings. So this is the first one, and the second one is secondary suites. So the intent of staff was to follow the protocol that council has adopted, whereby if there is a desire to deal with these items in a way different than in the normal strategic plan, then the council may consider doing that. And we hope that we are able to respond to the questions that you had and give you a sense of what it may take if you wanted to do these in a different way.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Okay, so were there any comments or questions from the council? Or do we want to go straight to Ms. Jensen? Okay, all right. I thought she looked like she was waiting for us to begin with questions.
Sure.
Okay, we have the report in front of us. So Councillor Murdoch?
Thank you, Acting Mayor Kirby. I appreciate the report. I think this was the point we had this coming back, so we'd have a sense of what could be done quickly and what couldn't be done, and so I appreciate the information that was given on there. There's a couple of questions I had that maybe weren't answered entirely. So the big one to me was just we have in our OCP around development permit areas some guidelines, and I don't know how much new builds come under for development permit areas. Is there any way, I guess my question is really around, and I'll just read out what it says. The guidelines are to retain and conserve as much natural vegetation, rock outcrops, existing hydrology, and unique site features as possible, including Gary Oaks, other large trees and significant vegetation, and to respect the existing topography, minimizing the need for cut and fill, major blasting, or tall retaining walls. So those are guidelines where we do development permit areas. So they're typically larger buildings, but the responses in the report really are around changing our legislation and so forth. Is there any application that we can give as council in terms of guidelines so that when considering application for, say, single-family homes, new single-family homes, that those same sort of considerations would be given when considering applications? Or does it have to be into regulations? And if you don't want to answer the question now, maybe that's a question that can come back at a future time. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Ms. Jensen?
I'll attempt to answer that question. The Local Government Act sets out the various topic areas that you can use to set up a development permit area. There really is nothing in the legislation that specifically addresses single-family homes. The closest you would get would be an intensive residential development permit area, which for a single-family context really doesn't fit with that. So as far as guidelines go, really where those kick in is if they're falling within another development permit area, such as a shorelines development permit area, or if you've got a single-family home that's maybe attached to a multifamily development, we could look at siting and design for that. Other than that, there's really not much under the legislation that we could do.
Okay, thank you. So that would be under the options shown here, possibly establishing a steep, like a steep slope development permit area would allow us to provide those kind of qualifications within that area.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And is there anything again? Is it possible to, and I'm loath of doing this because I appreciate, because every site is so different, that you want to sort of give the professionals the opportunity to guide the process in terms of the geotech engineers and so forth. But is there anything, again, within these sorts of areas, without going through a long legislative process of considering things like requiring applications, almost like not a variance application, obviously, but some application process where there's a large volume of rock to be removed? So that consideration would possibly come to council, or would have sort of be flagged as a consideration on these kind of slopes?
I don't think there would necessarily be anything specific unless council was specifically designating it within a select area for environmental considerations. Other than that, every private property owner has certain rights to their property as to how they can use that property, and it would be really difficult on a site-by-site basis to bring something like that forward for an approval that I'm not sure would be something that we could set up.
Yeah, okay. It sounds to me like if we want to consider this for these sorts of slopes where there's hydrology concerns and so forth, to possibly have that looked at as a development permit area in future. So I guess that would go to the referring it to priorities, because we don't have that as a priority currently. Okay, then the last question I have on this one is again kind of relates to process around, and this would be changing our bylaws, but slightly. One of the concerns raised on this particular issue was around the trees, and again, in the DP development permit area guidelines, it talks about retaining those Gary Oaks and so forth. We currently in our tree bylaw exclude trees within a new building envelope from having to be replaced. What is the process requirement for changing bylaws of that? If council wanted to say not exempt those, so if a tree was removed even within a building footprint, that it was still required to be a new tree to be planted. Is that something that has to go through a long, fulsome process, or is it something that would be considered a fairly minor change to a bylaw?
We could look at it as a minor change to a bylaw. That's something that would be addressed through parks. There was some direction for that through the urban forest management strategy as to how you were going to look at trees into the future. And part of that implementation of that strategy was to look to an update of the tree protection bylaw. It could also be addressed at that point. Thank you. And maybe you could remind me, because I think the timeline on that was somewhat stretched out, and there was a multi-year thing. And I'm not sure, do you remember where that sat in the timeline, the review of the bylaw itself? Yeah, I believe the review of the tree bylaw itself was in the immediate context, so this year or next year. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jensen. That's all your questions, Councillor Murdoch. Councillor Zelka?
Thank you so much, Chair. And thank you so much to staff for preparing such a thorough report. I very much appreciated reading it and found it fascinating in terms of the process that certainly the Building and Planning Department goes through. I noticed that it seems that from a planning perspective, the fundamentals of this report really seems to be sort of hinged upon Section 8.3c of the Community Charter, talking about the fundamental powers of council. I just wanted to start with a question to the Acting Director of Building and Planning. Is that really the sort of basis of the thrust of your report? Let's start with that question, please.
Ms. Jensen?
So Section 8.3c of the Community Charter speaks to the fundamental powers around specifically trees. So imposing requirements on trees where that bylaw still cannot prevent the use or density of a property. So I would not say it's at the core of the report, rather it's one component.
Thank you, if I may continue. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate the clarification on that part. So then it's the aspect of Section 56 and the other aspects you made reference to. I got that. Okay, thank you. What I wanted to, the second point I wanted to talk about then is that it seems that this staff report fundamentally addresses the planning considerations with respect to the request for a staff report. And I wanted to ask, while it's very much appreciated, and I very much loved and was very, as I say, very appreciative of all the information you provided. I wanted to ask whether the context needs to be larger in this case, because the motion sort of made reference to, I think the legislation in Section 500, if I remember correctly, talks about danger. And makes general reference, as certainly what we've heard from the public, to this whole concept of hazards and the feeling that people are having, especially the neighbors, either to one side or the other, or possibly the neighbors upslope or downslope. Just the whole concept of hazard. I do wish to speak sort of theoretically. I don't want to get into any specific property, since I know I have to be very careful how we talk about these things. But I do want to ask whether maybe the context of the staff report might possibly need to be expanded. So I was very pleased to see that the fire chief is here, the head of the Oak Bay Emergency Planning Program. And I wanted to, as I muse, I'm hopefully that the chief can listen in, and eventually I'll get to my question. But I'm musing with the concept of that because this touches on hazard, and because it touches on potential risk, and because it touches on areas that could potentially become an emergency in the theoretical, under the Emergency Program Act, there are requirements for local government to do certain things that I wonder, and I just wanted to ask, whether they apply here, in that I'm just going to pull it up for a moment here just so I can get the right wording here. A local authority, I'm reading from the Local Authority Emergency Management Regulations. A local authority must reflect in the local emergency plan prepared for it, under the very section of the Act, the potential emergencies and disasters that could affect all or any part of the jurisdictional area for which the local authority has responsibility. And the local authority must also assess the relative risk of occurrence and the potential impact on people and property of the emergencies or disasters under paragraph A up above. So it's speaking in the theoretical. I wanted to ask in general terms whether one aspect of that, how do I say this? I'm trying to get to my question and ask it without getting specific. So I would love the chief to possibly provide a bit of advice with respect to whether this report should be potentially referred to the Oak Bay Emergency Planning Program for an additional review and study, and possibly adding a piece into it, maybe, before we deal with passing it on to estimates. Since I see that the whole planning aspect has been taken care of with respect to hazards, but I'm not sure that the hazards, risks, and vulnerabilities aspect has been taken care of it yet in terms of possibly some aspects there.
Councillor Zelka, okay. I thought you were finished. Sorry.
I am not finished. Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to finish my sentence. It is hard for me to speak, and I know you're trying to move the meeting along, and I know you want to be finished before 10:30.
No, I
get
don't.
that.
I thought you had finished your question. So
No,
I was just.
I'm not. I should have everything written out, but I don't. I'm doing my best to finish. Thank you very much. So there's actually two parts here. One is a general question I'll be getting to in a moment for the chief about whether the emergency, whether we should include the emergency planning program as a referral. But I also wanted to ask, before we get there, about Section 500. I noted in the, I guess in the whereas clauses of the motion or the background material, Section 500 of the Local Government Act appears to provide specific abilities for council to make specific laws independent of some of the items that are in this report with respect to trees and the maintenance of trees, independent of density, independent of owner rights. Because it's dealing with specifically, as I say, hazards and danger. So my first question would be for the acting director of building and planning to ask about Section 500, why it wasn't mentioned in the report. I'll start there, please.
To respond to your question, Section 500 of the Local Government Act is specific to boards, so it's actually referencing regional districts. That's not applicable to municipalities. So then I go back to Section 8.3C of the Community Charter, which is what ties in municipalities with tree regulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jensen.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. If I may continue, Chair.
Certainly.
Thank you so much. So through you to now to the chief, I wanted to ask in particular, do you think it would be helpful for possibly a referral of this report to the Oak Bay Emergency Planning Program for a reflection with respect to hazards, risks, and vulnerabilities?
You're correct in your description of the emergency management regulation. And what we've done through the emergency response and recovery planning that we've done in the district, we've identified in there what our hazards are. So the hazard, risk, and vulnerability is identified within that risk, and we've identified how to respond to those risks from 1 to 14, I believe. I haven't got it right in front of me. And part of that does include landslide areas and such, because we do have those areas already designated here in the district with regards to emergency management response. With regards to building and planning and working with the emergency program and actually the fire department, we work seamlessly together on most applications here within the district for any areas that we do have some consideration of risk and so forth, and then try to identify how we can correct those hazards as we move forward.
Thank you, Chief Cockle.
If I may, Chair, please continue.
Okay.
A follow-up.
Okay.
With respect to...
You may have a follow-up, yeah.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much, Chief, for the reflection on that. I hear that you work seamlessly with building and planning, but I do note that God forbid a property up a steep slope should possibly experience some sort of a landslide, possibly due to some sort of a lot-to-lot line excavation. It's not staff that would be, sorry, it's not administrative staff that would be called out. It would be your staff. So I wanted to just have a clear answer, yes or no. Would it be helpful for the Oak Bay Emergency Planning Program to take a look at this report and possibly provide your input before we deal with it and move it on to planning and priorities?
The answer would be that it's already been done. Yes, we have input into the reports based on the current emergency response and recovery plan that we have in place. I hope that answers.
Thank you,
I'm
Chief.
trying
Thank
to
you.
see where you're coming from. That's
So,
all.
then I hear you say that you have already provided input into this report.
Not directly into this report, but we do provide information into the building and planning for any of the zoning that comes forth to us
Great.
on a
Thank-
continual basis.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you. Are there any other further questions or comments from council?
Move receipt.
Do you have a seconder? I'm not seeing a
none,
seconder.
I'll move it to be referred to, this report to be referred to the next priority session.
Second, please.
Okay, is there any comments or questions on that motion? Councillor Murdoch, and then Councillor, you were the one that moved it, you can motivate.
I don't think it's such motivation. I think there's some compelling components of this as to looking at it from a best practices of land management, which is part of our core pieces. There's a few aspects of it that I think might be moved more quickly. So I guess I would look at maybe. I guess I would maybe have a question for staff on this one. Is not to make a formal motion, but is there a way of wording in here just a request of the Parks and Rec to bring back a more detailed timeline of changes to the tree protection bylaw?
Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We can provide an update to council on where that process stands.
It does not require a motion or anything at this point. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so that everyone understand. Okay, Councillor Croft, yep.
Through you, Chair, I'm just wondering when the next council priority session will be held.
Madam Chair, that's scheduled after the next election. So that would be kind of November this year or January of the next year.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, so that would be referring it to the next council's strategic priority session. All right, and for the benefit of those that don't have the agenda in front of them, that this would take this process or development of a bylaw or the development permit application or development permit area process to the strategic priorities session of the next council, which has a varying timeline, but anywhere from 12 to 24 months, and with estimated costs of $30,000, $40,000, or $60,000. So significant costs that would be a decision of the future council. So are there any other further comments or questions regarding the motion? Okay, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Carries. All right. Next item is number 12, and it's Cannabis Regulations. So we have a report from the acting director of Building and Planning again, Ms. Jensen. I did it. See, I knew I was going to do it. I practiced and practiced all day, not mixing up the Debras and the Debbies and the Deb, and I still messed up the last names. So sorry about that, Ms. Jensen. If you wanted to give us an overview of your report and why this is coming before us this evening, that would be helpful.
Certainly. As I'm sure everybody is aware, the federal government is currently looking at legalizing cannabis. The estimated time for having that in place is July of this year. So in addition to that, the provincial government has also been taking steps in anticipation of that legalization. They're looking at setting out regulations with respect to minimum age, retail distribution models. Part of that would look at obtaining approvals from local governments as proposals are made for that distribution. Following that, municipalities across the province are looking at ways to respond effectively to the proposed legalization of cannabis. And specifically, how do we deal with the retail sales as part of that? So does it fall within our general categories of what is a retail sale? What is general merchandise? How do we look at business licensing? Do we want to prohibit it? Do we want to look at allowing it subject to certain conditions? So essentially, staff are looking for council direction to bring forward a report that would outline the options for that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jensen. It's good to have the understanding of where this comes from. So, Councillor Murdoch?
I was just prepared to make the motion as laid out here that direct staff to bring forward a report outlining options.
Seconded?
All right, are there any other questions or comments? Councillor Ney?
I just have a question. Given the scenarios likely to tax staff time, I'm just wondering, are there any monies forthcoming to help us respond to the requirement coming from the provincial legislation and federal to roll this out at a municipal level?
Not to my knowledge.
And the other follow-up question, I mean, we'll wait to see what you have to say in your report, but do you see that there'll be an opportunity for any community input to what's being suggested in your report?
Mr. Jones?
Madam Chair, maybe I'll take a stab at that. That will really be a decision on council's part. What we wanted to do today is to get direction from council, if it so chose to provide us some direction to come back with these different ideas. What that will allow us to do, if there were any folks that came forward looking to establish a use in Oak Bay, we would be in a position to say, at this point in time, council's not made any decisions. However, they've directed us to provide some options for them, and would put us in a position to hold in abeyance, to be honest, any applications that might come forward until council has chosen how it chooses to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. So that's more of, we'd be taking a more proactive approach rather than a reactive approach to any applications that might come forward. That's great work, and thank you for bringing this forward. I don't see any other questions or comments, so I think I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Carries. All right. Moving along to item number 13, which is a work plan for secondary suites. We have a report back from the Acting Director of Building and Planning. I think we'll get an overview of this item unless, yeah, I think we'll receive an overview of the item, but not given that there's not all of council here this evening, we may delay this item should that be the wish of council, but I'll check in with the council as we move along, but maybe give us a brief overview of your report, please, Ms. Jensen.
Certainly. Well, this report was really intended to respond to council's request to outline a project work plan with timelines, next steps, and lead staff related to creating policy and procedures for moving forward with a program around secondary suites in Oak Bay. So, in essence, we're looking at approximately a 13-month process to look at secondary suite implementation, taking approximately 3 months at the beginning into that to really outline in detail what that process would look like, developing a terms of reference, data collection, setting up a public engagement strategy, and retaining a consultant to help with the process. We would follow that with a number of public engagement sessions, looking to gather information and then reviewing that information with the community, and then starting to prepare a draft strategy which would work its way through council.
Thank you. Thanks for that overview. Okay, were there any questions or comments from council for staff regarding the report? Councillor Ney?
Well, I guess just to staff, thank you very much for the report. From my perspective, there's no surprises, and it's helpful just to have this before us. And it's very much in line with what we've agreed as a council to move forward with in our strategic priorities. So My question to you, I've just lost the report. Here we go. To staff is that you've got more or less a timeline beginning, as I've understood your report, to say in July. And so, again, that, as I understand it, the HCA project would be winding down by that time, and so the July commencement of this project in July is really in line with what we've agreed to as a council at our strategic priorities, in our strategic priority document. So my question really to staff is, if we wanted that to move forward commencing in July, do you need some specific direction from council at this meeting?
Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think as was mentioned, what staff have said is that this they would see this piece of work occurring after the completion of the HCA, and right now that's kind of the time frame we're predicting. The one thing that will be required is confirmation in the budget that the money set aside for this work will still be available to do that work.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Can I just follow up?
Certainly.
So do you need a specific direction this evening to carry on, or do we just assume that's what's being suggested here is what we've already agreed to?
So Madam Chair, again, we anticipate that if things go according to what we think, the HCA project will wind up in the early summer, and what we've told council and council has agreed to is that we would then move on to this project. I would reiterate, though, in the estimates meeting, we would need to ensure if the project's going to continue, that funding is made available.
Thank you.
And we set aside $60,000, as was mentioned in the report last year, and so that money would be carried forward as it hasn't been spent yet, right?
That's correct. It is in the budget that will be coming forward to estimates.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. All right, are there any other further questions? I think what I'm hearing is essentially this is following the work plan that we've already laid out with previous decisions of council. So I would feel comfortable asking council to make a decision tonight, which is essentially just to receive this report for information. And allow us to continue with our strategic priorities as they were laid out at the last session and in our last budget.
I'll move receipt.
Seconded.
Call the question or a comment?
Just a quick comment on this. I have no problem with the motion. I think there was been a couple of times this has come and we've asked to have everybody around the table. This is the thing. I think we need to take it to estimates. We need to have that discussion. We need to have money assigned. I think how we're going to spend that money is logically to come back to this table again. But I think it needs to go forward right now as it stands, because there is important work that has to get done. So, but I think we have sort of agreed as a body that we would talk about this as a whole group. So I think, moving it to estimates, having that consideration and spending of that money is an important piece. But I don't want to exclude the possibility of having this come back to actually discuss the application of those funds and the timelines.
There's no mention, if I could just clarify with staff, there's no mention of sending this to estimates. Is that's because the money will just be carried forward to estimates already? You just said that it's in the budget already?
That's correct. We budgeted for those funds in a previous year, and so they are currently sitting in reserve until such time as those funds are required, which this year we've included in the budget.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. So it's not a question of sending it to estimates. It's just a matter of receipt, and therefore that's why I feel comfortable calling the question on this today rather than waiting for a full council. But that was what you were asking for.
Perhaps that does require a bit more clarification. Then does receiving the report now? I guess I don't want to interrupt the budget process. I think that's an important piece. So, but I do think if we're going to talk about the report, the specifics of the report, does it make sense for us to receive this now, or does that close off the discussion of the report, Or is it better just to table this and have it come back again and discuss the contents of the report? Would that interrupt the process of discussing it because I'm not worried about the big piece. I'm just worried about some of the details with the updated timelines and so forth that we're looking at.
I think we're looking at the timeline. I think the report itself just speaks for itself. But the questions you seem to be having are around the process that will come back to us. I think which are the terms of reference that will be laid out with a consultant, a planning consultant, and those terms of reference would be developed over the summer in the first 3 months of work in this, as was laid out in the report. So in the commencement of the process, it says develop project terms of reference, and I think that would come back to us from staff after the 3 months of work, July, August, or September. So at the end of September or early October, we might receive the initial terms of reference, and it's at that point that we could have that debate about the direction of council. But I don't think this report is truly the time to have any kind of debate. It's information and from staff.
Okay. I mean, I would like, we had a debate last time when this came forward. There were some unanswered questions. It's gone away. It's come back. We have some of those answers now. So I don't want to hold this up. I think it's fine. We're moving down this path. I just would like to, I guess, I'm asking the question of if we receive it now, it goes to estimates. At what point, so is that correct, that we essentially would deal with this when it comes back with terms of references, or would it come back, is it better to have that conversation ahead of time before it goes down that path of hiring a consultant or developing terms of reference?
Yes, there's a step process. So essentially, those funds are in the budget. They will be coming forward to the estimates meeting. So there's an opportunity for further discussion there, as well as another opportunity once the terms of reference come forward. So we will certainly keep you informed as we go along and provide you as much information as possible.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. Councillor Zelka?
Thank you, Chair. Referring back to the March 12th minutes that we approved, with respect to the discussion around this item, it says, it was noted that the intent of the motion was to have staff prepare 2 reports as follows: assessment of staff resources to initiate and complete the project, as well as impacts on the Heritage Conservation Area project. And number 2, a report outlining the process and timelines. We have a protocol with respect to changes to our strategic process, and it seems to me that we have made a slight adjustment in terms of possibly expecting some work to overlap as opposed to being what was I understood to be sequential. So I would actually feel more comfortable with the suggestion put forward to table the motion until we're all here at the table to actually follow the protocol as per the priorities and have everyone speak to that with respect to this report.
Councillor Councillor Zelka, I think that's exactly what we're doing, though. We've received the report, or we will be receiving the report with this motion, which outlines the fact that once the HCA is wrapped up, that this process could begin. We asked the question in the motion that was made in the previous meeting, asking for a report to see if the 2 projects could overlap, and this report clearly states that it can't, and that it would begin after the HCA process, Heritage Conservation Area, I'm using my acronyms. The Heritage Conservation Area process is resolved, and I think that's expected to be done at the end of June or early July. So it's not going to overlap, and that question is resolved within this report. So we'd still be falling back to our original strategic priorities plan, which was to have one follow the other. So we aren't changing anything.
May I?
Certainly.
Thank you so much. Following the protocol with respect to what was asked for in terms of the assessment of staff resources and the report outlining the process and timelines, I move that we table this until, and following also our long-held process to have everyone at the table for, especially for a 4-3 type decision, I request that we table this, or move that we table it until everyone is at the table to vote.
I might need some assistance here. I'm not sure if we can, we have a motion on the table. We have a motion on the floor that was moved and seconded. And so move to table, is that in order?
Yeah, you have a motion to receive. A motion to postpone to another meeting would take precedence over the motion on the floor.
Thank you for the confirmation. All right. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Call the question?
A dialogue, possibly? Or a discussion?
I don't think you can debate a motion. Can you clarify for me? Can we debate it?
A motion to table, which is just a table for this meeting only, is not debatable or amendable, but a motion to postpone is debatable and amendable.
So that was a motion to table, or was it a motion to
I believe
postpone?
the intention was to postpone.
Your intention was to postpone. Okay, so we can debate that. Okay, I heard table, so I was thinking we weren't allowed to debate it. All right, so if it's a motion to postpone to the next meeting, did we want to have a debate?
If I may, very briefly, it's to follow basically not just the protocol as mentioned in terms of the strategic priorities, but I've been very pleased that our mayor Nils Jensen has been very adamant at following the process for items that are of contentious nature, where has been a 4-3 vote. He's been very good, and I very much appreciated how he's always had held off votes until we've all been here. I very much appreciated that, and I'd like to continue that tradition. Thank you.
Councillor Nate?
So the way I see this is, I've understood from when we were asking staff the question that this would follow on the heels of the HCA, that it wouldn't overlap, that this project would commence upon completion of the HCA. That's how I understood staff to explain it. And I do appreciate on significant issues that we have an understanding amongst us that everybody would be at the table. But I've also understood, and I think it's important to honor that, but there will be more discussion at the estimates table that gives all councillors an opportunity to have their say about this issue. But it's not that big of a deal for me, but I think we should just move it forward and get on with it and have the discussion at the estimates meeting. That's how I intend to vote, but if it goes the other way, that's fine too.
Councillor Croft and then Councillor Murdoch.
Yeah, we'll be voting against the motion to postpone. And I would also like to point out that the vote on March 12th was 5-2, with only Councillor Braithwaite and Zelk against the motion to ask for the report. We have the report, and I think we should move the report forward.
Councillor Murdoch.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm of mixed minds on this motion to table. And the reason I am is I think that there's an advantage to it in the sense that we actually would have a bit more fulsome discussion. I think that discussion probably could happen at the terms of reference point, so I'm not too concerned about that. I am concerned about having too much of a debate at estimates. We have a lot of financial stuff to get through at estimates, so trying to consider this as a policy discussion at the estimates table is generally a bad idea, so I don't want it to go there. And be the primary reason I would support this motion to table now. Because I think it does deserve to have its own separate piece. And I'm, like I said, I'm comfortable with having the discussion about the terms of reference. I think my concern maybe would just be at the estimates table that we word our support of the funding sufficiently broadly that it encompasses all of this and any possibly some widening of that as well. But I mean, I'll support the motion. I think it's better to have this conversation as a group, but I'm not so fussed about it, frankly. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. One of the reasons why I would prefer a more fulsome discussion with everyone here at the table, now that we're getting into details, is that I'm worried that the project terms of references will be prepared by staff independently. They'll be brought to the council, and then we'll be asked to then sort of make reference to them without maybe some fundamental aspects. And what I'm referring to, at least one of the things that concerns me right now, that's not addressed in this report, is the fact that this doesn't appear to be cost neutral. And structuring this program cost neutral versus something that that is paid for by general taxes would completely change the terms of reference. So I would really love to have a discussion amongst everyone in terms of what those terms of reference might potentially look like before we start them. And that's why I wanted to have everyone at the table before we move forward. Thank you.
All right. I think as I would be a deciding vote, I think I'm going to express my opinion as chair that I think that we've debated this subject extensively at previous council meetings, and that this report won't change, that doesn't impact or change that debate significantly. It's merely laying out a timeline that we had already agreed to at the last strategic priority session and then the last budget process, where the heritage conservation area was going to come first, and then the secondary suites process would follow. And I would be loath to delay it any further, given that it's considered a critical piece of work in our in the recommendations of the official community plan implementation schedules. And I think that any further delay is putting us further back, and I'd rather not do that. So I think this is moving a receipt is an adequate step, and it's not worthy of debate at this point, and that we should save our debate for the terms of reference when that comes back in September. If there is anything within that to debate.
I just have one
Councillor
more
Ney?
comment to follow up, and it just in response to Councillor Zelka, because I don't disagree with you, Councillor Zelka, about cost neutral, but the plan has a very robust public engagement strategy, and so I suspect there's a lot of the community that think likewise, and that is an opportunity as we consult with the community to shape the program such that it will be a cost neutral program. So we can debate that at the council, but I think really that's going to be answered as we work with the community to develop the program. So I'm going to vote against the motion.
All right. Seeing no further hands, I'm going to call the question. Oh, did you have more comments, Councillor Murdoch?
Probably shouldn't. I think the other argument that's to have in terms of hearing the arguments here, they're all good. In terms of tabling it is the one aspect of this that I think really needs some consideration, and it keeps weighing on my mind, is this timeline. So we're just starting this process and investing the $60,000 in this now. I mean, I think we need to have a bit of a fulsome discussion in terms of where that money is going to be spent, because the next council may, I'm hoping, will prioritize some broader housing questions as part of this and include those. And so I would like to possibly see that money being spent if we're doing the base work over the next 3 months. So the timeline, as it's laid out here, starting in July, to my mind, has changed a little bit of what we can accomplish in this term, and so I think it deserves a little bit of talking too in terms of where we want to spend that money. And I think it's easier to do early than it is to do later. So I'm supportive of the tabling motion, but like I said, it's not the end of the world one way or the other.
All right, I think I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Sorry, I held my hand up because I was going counting, but I shouldn't have done that. I'm opposed. So Councillor Croft, nay, and Kirby opposed. The motion to table or postpone, fails. So we need another motion. So the motion to receive is on the table still, so we will, I will call the question on the motion to receive. All in favor? Opposed? One opposed. Councillor Zelka. Motion carries. Great. There are no new items of correspondence to receive. Let's move to new business. Are there any, is there any new business or verbal reports from council? Councillor Murdoch?
No new business, just a couple of quick verbal reports that people might be interested in. And no specific updates on the heritage conservation area to speak about. Then we're just continuing to meet and work that through. But there's just a couple of things. One is Craig Derrick Castle and the library started a Join the Culture Pass program, so you can take out a pass to Craig Derrick Castle with family and go visit it, along with an art gallery and museum and other aspects. So there's those partnerships end up in sort of some cross-pollination. So there's the first talk with the Craig Derrick Castle. It's a cultural talk on Eleanor Dunsmuir on April 28th. So it'd be an interesting talk coming up. And we also just released the 2017 annual report in terms of some of the numbers. And they just wanted to point out how much it keeps growing despite being the busiest per capita library system in Canada. The Wi-Fi access went up 40% last year, year over year, to almost 854,000 people accessing the Wi-Fi. And also worth just noticing a couple of new things. One I think was identified here before was lynda.com. It's been very popular. 15,000 plus times it's been accessed. And if you haven't used it, it's a fantastic tool for professional learning online. And normally $20 a month, but included in your library card. And the other is the Naxos Classical Music Library, which has 800 labels and 2 million tracks of classical music that isn't available other streaming services. So that's available as well through the library. So those are big things that happened in 2017, and of course we're busy at it now in 2018.
Great, thank you. Are there any other verbal reports or new business?
Move adjourned.
All right, thank you.
Second.
Next, call a question. All in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone, for coming.